It's not all about fish oil. There's all kinds of other wonderful things that we should eat, and that, looking at this picture, I would like to be eating. Fish oil and omega-3s is not the only problem that we have with the contemporary diet, because of the menace, the absolute menace of ultra-processed foods, which now take up a disproportionate amount of space in our shopping trolleys and on our kitchen tables. Now, Americans are pretty special. I'm not an American, although I live here, and I look at Americans with a rather skeptical and sometimes astonished eye, because what I see when I look at the statistics is that Americans are absolutely global leaders when it comes to eating these kinds of foods. North Americans are now consuming 61 to 63% of all their calories in the form of ultra-processed foods. Quite astonishing. Britain comes next because you own Britain, basically. And then a number of other European countries come a long way after that. This is the bad news, because poor diet, and in particular the consumption of ultra-processed foods, has been shown to be the biggest cause of early death globally. This is a terrible diet. You can think of it as an industrial diet. These ultra-processed diets are the equivalent of the kibbles that you give your domestic pets. I wouldn't feed them to my dog or my cat. I only have a dog, but I'm speaking in a slightly more theoretical way here. We know that the industrial diet has disastrous effects on your epigenetic profile, which affects the way in which your DNA expresses itself. We know it absolutely cuts a swathe through your entire metabolism, leading to 4 drivers of chronic degenerative disease. They drive them through chronic inflammation, which, as I said earlier, leads to a process at the end of this complex sequence of tissue disorganization and destruction, combined with type B malnutrition, because so many of the calories that we eat are empty in ultra-processed foods, leaving us depleted in a range of vitamins, and I know you call them vitamins, trace elements, and various phytonutrients that we actually need. They're catalysts that we require in order to repair damaged tissue. But because we have so much chronic inflammatory stress and we're so badly nourished, we move inevitably towards the slow destruction of healthy tissue that is one of the hallmarks of chronic degenerative disease. The ultra-processed diet also creates dysbiosis, initially in the large intestine, which then has knock-on effects on the microbiota of many other tissues in the body. Each of your other organs has its own microbiota. There is not a single system or organ in the body which is sterile, from the blood to the brain to the gonads. Each of them has its own very specific microbiota, and all of them, it appears, are adversely affected if you have dysbiosis in the large bowel, which is indisputably caused by the modern ultra-processed diet. And then we have glycemic mismatch, which is a combination of eating far too much sugars and digestible carbohydrates, pouring glucose into the bloodstream, and an insufficiently physically active lifestyle, which means that your skeletal muscles are not removing enough glucose from the bloodstream. And it's the skeletal muscles, not the liver, that have always been the most significant way of removing glucose from the bloodstream, leading to an accumulation of glucose, hyperglycemia, moving towards hyperinsulinemia, moving towards metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, and then a raft of long-term complications. It's made worse by our low energy lifestyle, thanks to the internal combustion engine on which North Americans appear to be uniquely dependent, and the resulting, and information technology, which is international after all, that makes everything worse. And what we have been doing for the last 30 years is studying the way in which these damaging systems work in order to provide antidotes, which I think we are now in a position to be able to do. We can damp chronic inflammation without causing immunosuppression with a combination of omega-3, polyunsaturated fatty acids, and amphiphilic polyphenols. Works extremely effectively. We can reverse dysbiosis, putting mixed fermentable carbohydrates back into the diet where they always used to be. We can address this issue of type B malnutrition with a very broad spectrum micro and phytonutrient support program. It's like an A to Z, but on steroids. Not that we like steroids. And then we can address some of the problems of glycemic mismatch by telling you to eat fewer sugars and carbs and take more exercise, which I think you should do. But for those who won't do that, or in many cases can't, we can address some of those issues by upregulating an enzyme called AMP kinase. Some people call it the metabolic master switch. It is activated by physical exercise, but we have various plant derivatives that we can use to achieve the same endpoint.